To cross over to Santon, where there's a TNA taking place. The discussion is all about what is radical economic transformation. I'll hand you over to Peter. He'll introduce his guests to us. Good morning to you, Peter, and everybody gathered there.
Morning, Leanne, and a very warm welcome to all of you at home. Yes, this is the latest in the series of New Age Business Briefings brought to you by the SABC, and today very kindly sponsored by Eskom, making sure these conversations continue. And as Leanne said, the topic of discussion is radical economic transformation, or RET, as people have been saying. And it's become a bit of a catchphrase and a subject of discussion ever since the President delivered his State of the Nation address earlier this year. He mentioned it a number of times in his speech, and it seemed to resonate with a lot of people. But I suppose one of the challenges is trying to figure out what it actually means. What does radical economic transformation mean? Is it a policy shift? Is it doing the things that we've said we're going to do more urgently and more pressing? Well, to help unpack that and help us with the thoughts on this particular issue, we've got a panel here, but we'd like you at home to be very much a part of this conversation. What are your thoughts when you hear the term radical economic transformation? What are your expectations? Hashtag TNA BizBrief, that's B-I-Z, hashtag TNA BizBrief, and at Morning Live SABC. But let's meet our panel that are going to help us with the conversation that we're going to have with the studio audience here. And to my immediate right, we have the founder of the Decolonization Foundation, somebody that everybody knows quite well, Zwanele Manyi. Always a pleasure to have you. Welcome.
Morning.
Next to you, we have Chris Hart, who's an independent financial market strategist, also no stranger to the media. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
But somebody who's new, and perhaps we'll see a lot more in the future, but I think we had a press conference about a week ago. President of the Black Empowerment Foundation, Ryan Bettridge. And I'm sure everyone's going to be wondering, what is a white man doing heading a Black Empowerment Foundation? So let me start with you then.
Good morning, Peter.
So tell us about the Black Empowerment Foundation, and also what your thoughts are on black economic, yes, radical economic transformation. Gosh, thanks.
Good morning, Peter. Good morning, everyone. First of all, just to correct you, I'm not the president. I'm just one of the executive members.
Okay.
And in terms of representing, let's say I drew the short straw for today.
Okay.
The Black Empowerment Foundation is the NPO. It's an organization with its mandate and constitution set around radical economic transformation and ensuring black economic emancipation within South Africa.
Okay, so what is radical economic transformation?
Well, first of all, we must understand it's a revolution. Tata Madiba, as we approach Freedom Day in the next 5 days, fought for equality and he fought for our political freedom. But up until this day, no one has fought for economic freedom. So I believe, or we believe as the BEF, that radical economic transformation is the beginning of the economic freedom of the greater and broader society.
Okay.
If I can break it down, things that need to be done is the breakdown of monopolies. We're talking about monopolies and the fruits from their trees that have stemmed from apartheid. We need to include the rural economy into the greater economy through the stimulation and creation of community economies. We need to educate and capacitate the broader society, especially in those rural and exposed communities. And lastly, we need to reconsider our natural resources in terms of land and mines.
Okay, we'll unpack that a little further. It all sounds very familiar, I must say. Chris Hart, radical economic transformation.
Yeah, I think one needs to appreciate, if one goes back and says, what are some of the realities And with radical economic transformation, I often hear laundry lists that is going to achieve all of these things, and some of them are actually the exclusion. If you do the one, it actually excludes the other. Radical economic transformation is about the policy of economic transfer, all right? And as such, it becomes anti-growth. It then becomes a policy of exclusion for the vast majority of people who are unemployed. And the reason I say that is to actually change the economy. The biggest source of inequality and poverty is, in fact, unemployment. You sort unemployment out, and things like inequality is reduced. Housing problems are reduced, education problems are reduced, crime problems are reduced. There's all sorts of other social issues that are diminished, may not be solved, but certainly diminished if you solve unemployment as an issue. And the only way you can solve unemployment as an issue is to vastly expand the size of the economy. This economy is too small for the number of people in it. We employ 16 million people, and 12 million jobs are needed. The job surveys say about 8 million, but when you normalize economic participation rate and look at the age profile of the demographics, we need about 12 million jobs being created. There are only 2 million whites participating in the economy. So this is a black problem. And the only way to actually include those 12 million people in the economy is to actually build an economy that can absorb those 12 million people. And that needs capital, because you cannot bring new economic activity into existence without capital. And capital is savings. And so we need to actually boost savings and encourage foreign capital, because we don't have enough capital in the country to actually solve that problem. So I actually believe if we're actually looking at a policy of just economic transfer, it actually is an elitist policy, all right, aimed at the connected rather than the actual excluded. The truly excluded in the economy will remain excluded, because with it will come stagnation, with it will come further downgrades, and we need to actually resolve that as a problem. There are no magic wands in economics. You have to have capital. The country must be able to attract capital, and we can't go to international investors and start speaking gobbledygook, all right, that's something people can't understand, and expect people to come as investors to the country. We need investment, foreign investment, and we also need local investment. And that confidence needs to be important. We need to appreciate anybody who's prepared to invest and create jobs are part of the solution and should not be defined as part of the problem.
Okay, very interesting opening thoughts. Mzanene Bani.
Yeah, I think for me, radical economic transformation starts with the mind. It means black people must be trusted. That's a starting point. You will never have radical economic transformation with the kind of thinking that Chris is articulating, where black people are generally seen as just workers and not owners. This is the issue. It must change in the mind. When you see a black person, you must not just see somebody that needs work. You must see an industrialist. This is a starting point. It's in the mind. You see, even the government must lead with this. This is why even with the legal firms and the briefings and what have you, we must see more briefings of black lawyers. We must see more briefing of black professional firms. We must see more briefing and business being given to black people. The whole thing starts with the mind. As long as when we see black people, we see failures. When we see black people, we see corrupt people. When we see black people, we see incompetence. Then we're not about to do this thing. What is the situation? The situation is very dire. And this is what must change. We cannot have a situation where black people continue to have 3% of the JSE. We cannot, and I know the arguments for that. Chris is going to raise them, and I'm going to deal with him if he raises the issue. But black people own only 3% of the JSE. That is fact. It cannot be that black people who continue to be 80% of the economic active population, but are only only about 10% on the top positions. This means we've got a racist economy. This is what must change. When we say radical economic transformation, it means first and foremost that black people must be trusted with important positions, with running this economy. We cannot have a situation where, when we think about the economy of this country, the first thing that comes into mind is white people running these monopolies. And I think even with that issue, and people tend to run away from white monopolies to actually white monopoly capital, not just monopoly capital. The difference is that when you say monopoly and not include white, you end up with a situation where you target Eskom, you target Randwater, you target all the state-owned enterprises, which should continue to be monopolies, because those monopolies ensure that we've got a controlled price structure so that the poorest of the poor are not affected. Once you deconcentrate Eskom, Randwater, and all of those state monopolies, it means that the vulnerable are going to be at the mercy of the markets, at the mercy of the people that are profit-driven. Okay. So, in summary, it starts with the mind. Okay. Trust black people, then radical economic transformation has got a chance. But if you continue to say black people are just workers, yes, and all that, and they keep getting excluded, when we talk about local content, we're just thinking about increasing the work of the white-owned firms, and blacks are just there as workers. This is a problem. All right. We want black owners.
Okay, so I'm hearing Steve Biko in your voice there. But we're going to come back, and I think you've heard three different takes and bites of this cherry, radical economic transformation. Finance Minister says that it will be done within fiscal constraints set out by National Treasury. Zweli Mkhize says it's about land. We're getting various versions of this idea, and so when we come back, we're going to start trying to say, well, if it's going to work, if we're going to try and make it work, surely we need to start on the same page. Otherwise, we're just all going to go in different directions. What are your thoughts at home? Hashtag TNA Biz Brief at Morning Live SABC. All of this coming up after this.